With no further ado, I would like to introduce Houda Shafique. She is a McGill undergraduate in bioengineering, and she's co-president. I was telling everyone you were the president. She shares the presidency, that's even more diverse, of promoting opportunities for women in engineering group. And I am excited to hear about overcoming a limiting narrative and the calculus that's involved in diversity. That's fantastic and amazing. And I heard about Houda Shafique from my colleague, Carl LaRush, who is the science program coordinator, who sent me her contact information and said, we have to have this speaker here at Vanier. And so she said yes, and we thank her for coming. Welcome and thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. I'll get started right away. So, like your amazing teacher was saying, I'm going to be talking about overcoming a limiting narrative. And I'm sure all of you have seen this wonderful title of mine. I'm going to get into this a little bit more. I'm curious if anyone has actually looked up what it means, but we'll get to it at the end of the presentation, and hopefully you'll get a better insight of the calculus analogy that I'll be making during my presentation. So, a quick overview of my talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am and what I do. Then I'm going to talk about the single narrative problem that I feel like exists in engineering. And then on a lighter note, talking about the ways in which we can overcome the single narrative. So start with who am I and what do I do? And like yourselves, I was a SAGEP student not long ago. So I was a student at Marinopolis College. I was in the health science program and I got to do my honors there as well. So here you'll see a picture of me. I actually got an entrance scholarship back when I was in Marinopolis. And then the other picture, sorry, can you guys see my cursor when I point at pictures? Yeah, awesome. And then here you'll see a picture of me presenting my final project. So this is me when I entered and this is me when I left SAGEP. And so this was my honors project. At the end, I talked about, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember what I talked about now. I talked about the impact of chlorine in the environment and how we can use bacteria in order to culture that chlorine out of the environment in hopes of having a cleaner lakes and rivers. So I spent my whole life here in Montreal. This is a picture from on top of Mount Royal, and underneath you see the McGill campus, which is where I am now. So I'm doing, like your teacher said, my degree in bioengineering at McGill University. So a question I get a lot is, what is bioengineering? And to be honest, I'm like 3 years in and I'm not totally sure myself. So I'm going to try to express it as best as I can. So bioengineering at McGill encompasses two main fields of engineering: biological engineering and biomedical engineering. So biological engineering is when you have biological elements and you apply engineering principles to them. So you have cells and you decide to engineer those cells to pursue a certain task, or you have tissue or organs and you engineer them to do a certain task. Biomedical engineering, on the other hand, is when you apply engineering devices to biological phenomena. In this case, you can have machines like MRIs, CT scans, and so on, big machines that you basically use on biological phenomena in order to probe their various characteristics. And some of the questions I get a lot about my program is, well, what is it like? So are there labs? What's your schedule like? How many students per class? Do you speak to profs? And what kind of classes do you take? This is an incredibly new program at McGill. It's only 3 years old. I'm actually in the third cohort. So now it's 5 years old. Back when I joined, it was 3. And I've included some pictures from some of my classes. So this picture right here, this is Luvia. Luvia is our 3D bioprinter at McGill. So here we're actually printing cupcake frosting. So this was an interesting lab. We got to use simulation techniques in order to design the cupcake frosting on our computers. And then we programmed the bioprinter to print cupcake frosting on our glass slides. Really great application of bioprinting. Here you'll see gold nanoparticles that we synthesized in the lab. So one of the questions I get a lot is, well, the nanoparticles are gold, but why is it pink? And so this is a really interesting phenomena because metallic nanoparticles don't express the color of the metal. It's interesting because metallic nanoparticles have optical resonance. And what that means is they're actually optically active in the visible range. So the visible range is all the colors that we're able to see. So like red, blue, green, yellow, and so on. And so those gold nanoparticles, when they're at this very small size, they have the property of the color pink. So if you shine the color pink on these metallic nanoparticles, they will become optically active and they're able to enhance the electric field around them. This is an amazing property and it's used quite frequently in biomedical design and biomedical devices. And we also get to take a lot of design courses. So this was a design course I took in my second year. We had to design a device that was mechanical, biological, novel, and quantitative. So this is a design of two cells. And basically what happens is as the cells pass through this device, we measure the adherence of the cells, how well the cells stick to each other. And this is really an important metric because as people age, cells will stick less and less to each other. And in the case of cancer, what happens is cancer cells are able to travel in your body and metastasize when the adhesion between two cells is weakened and the cancer cell passes through. So this device measures the adhesion between the two cells in order to determine whether it is possible for cancer to metastasize in a certain patient or not. So these are all the fun activities you can do if you pursue a bioengineering degree. So I think I've answered a couple of the questions here. There are labs, there are design courses. You do take quite a few classes. You'll be taking, 5 classes per semester, which for university is quite a bit, but it's definitely engaging, definitely keeps you active. Bioengineering is a small program at McGill, so we're about 40 students per class. We do get to speak to our profs a lot because it's a small program. We get to have a more intimate connection with our profs. And the kinds of classes that I take, I've talked about this a little bit, design courses, lab courses, but also a lot of theory courses. What about relevant work experience? This is a question I get a lot in engineering because people think as soon as you're done your engineering degree, you can start working. I guess that is partially true. So some of the work that I've gotten to do is through internships throughout my degree. I've gotten to do a research internship. So this is me 2 summers ago presenting my research project. This is all pre-COVID. I got to present my research project on optically active nanoparticles, which is what I was talking about before. I was also a research student for last summer, but unfortunately this was canceled due to COVID. I was really upset, but I managed to get an internship. This was an artificial intelligence internship. I'm sure all of you guys have heard about AI and how AI is going to change the world and everything. So I got to work on this, and this was really compatible with this new virtual world because you can work on AI from your computer at home. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that later in my presentation because I think everyone listening will have the skill set to work on AI from their own homes and get a lot of relevant and cool experience. So this is a neural network that I made while I was on my internship, and I actually got to learn from people at IBM. What about extracurriculars? So this is what makes school worth it, you guys. Take the time to, do the extracurriculars that interest you. One of the groups that I'm involved with is promoting opportunities for women in engineering. If you went to high school in Montreal, you may have heard of us. Every year we have one big conference where we invite students from local Montreal high schools to come and spend a day at McGill with us. We have lab tours, design competitions, a full day of fun. So this was, I think, from 2 years ago. Our POW conference, and this is our executive team. This is last year's picture. Of course, I don't have a picture from this year because we haven't been allowed on campus, but there's me, and I've been on the executive team for 2 years now. I'm also involved with our engineering undergraduate society, as well as the International Genetically Engineered Machine Competition. This is a competition held annually at MIT. And this is a competition where for our year, what we did is we came up with a vaccine design. And this has been increasingly relevant with COVID. We unfortunately did not get to present because of COVID, but we're hoping to present next year. And I've also gotten the chance to volunteer with the McGill Engineering Student Center and the Department of Bioengineering at McGill. So let's get into it. Let's get into the single narrative problem in engineering. And I want to start by talking about one of my favorite people in the world, Ngozi. So Ngozi, she is an African writer, and she writes about this idea of, so first of all, I actually learned about her back when I was in CESHEF, and she talks about this idea of a single narrative. So what exactly is a single narrative? So she goes through this all in her TED Talk. I've linked it over here. So if any of you get the chance to listen, please do. But to summarize, she says a single narrative is a stereotype. And the problem with stereotypes is that they are not, sorry, the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. And that's kind of this problem, right? So that's in a nutshell, what's happening with the single narrative is that we take one story and we make that the true story. And so the example that she gives in her TED Talk is that she knew this person named Fide. And Fide was somebody who came to their household back when they were living in Africa, and he came and he used to like clean things for them. He was kind of like the busboy around their house. And her mother would always say, "Oh, we don't talk about Fide's family. Fide's family is very poor. We don't want to like associate with that. Blah blah blah." And so she had this mindset that Fide's family was someone that she could not talk about, was someone that she did not want to associate with because her family did not associate with them. And one day, when they went to go visit Fide's family, they found that Fide's family was exactly like her own. You know, they were just sure, economically, they may have been less well off, but this idea that when we're young, we can create these stereotypes and we can create a single narrative, and that sometimes it becomes instilled within us. And that's the single story that we carry forward. That's the idea of stereotypes. So I'm sure all of you have heard about what stereotypes are. This is nothing new, but I want to present what exactly the single narratives are in engineering. And so one of them is well known and one of them is, I guess, less well known. So one is engineering is a man's field. This is the single narrative that exists, is that engineering is for men. Not the case. We'll talk about that more. The other one is this underrepresentation of women in engineering. So we hear this more and more, and I'm going to talk about why exactly I'm putting this under the list of single narratives in engineering, why it's important that this is not the single narrative in engineering. So like I said, please listen to her talk. She's amazing, and I'll talk a little bit more about her later on.
Can I just
Yeah,
ask you a question about her talk? Would you be able to
yes,
send me that link and I'll post it in the chat for everyone
sure, I
near
will.
the end of your talk? Yeah, thanks.
Awesome, yes. Okay, so one of the things I want to talk about now is this interesting paper that I read. So one of the things I want everyone to take away from today is when you read scientific papers, learn to read figures. I think sometimes papers can get very complicated. I'm sure for assignments, you're going to have to read papers, and it's often very heavy, very dense material, and it's difficult to swallow. So what I would recommend is learn to read figures because they contain a lot of information and very little reading. So this is a figure from a paper that looked basically at the levels of gender inequality, and they related the level of gender inequality to mathematic anxiety. So this is the idea of they measured gender inequality in countries, in various countries, and they saw that countries with more gender inequality should have more math anxiety. And this idea where they want to promote gender equality, there should be less math anxiety. So the idea is, let's say in Canada, we talk a lot about how the genders should be equal. If the genders are equal, we think that women and men will be equally confident in their ability to work with numbers. But what they found was that Canada or other countries where there's a lot of gender equality, where we really promote this idea that women are just as competent at math as men, we see a very stark difference in between the math anxiety. So this right here, the red line, this is the national average for girls. The blue line is the national average for boys. And countries with high gender equality, so over here, actually have a very big difference in the math anxiety. And what this shows is that girls have more anxiety in their math abilities than boys in countries with high gender equality. Similarly, if we look at math performance, girls outperform boys in math performance, and yet still girls have higher math anxiety. So something to look at is girls who perform better at math have a higher math anxiety than boys who perform at that same level. So this is obviously really weird, not the results anyone expected. People would figure, if a girl is good at math and if the country that she lives in promotes gender equality, you'd expect low math anxiety, but these are not the results that we see. And so it relates to this bigger problem that when we talk too much about gender equality and when we talk too much about putting men and women at an equal playing field, we end up increasing math anxiety and we end up increasing this anxiety of women pursuing STEM fields. And this is not something new, but this is new in terms of it's being said out loud for the first time. So this was actually published in 2016. And I've linked the paper down here if anyone wants to read it. Like I said, these papers are sometimes very dense, but learn to read figures and learn to analyze figures and learn to extract information from figures because it saves you a lot of reading. And so this also relates to an idea called money fog. So obviously, this idea that I presented over here, it relates. You can relate this to the fact that we see less women in tech fields, and we see less women in engineering, and less women in STEM fields. But it could also relate to ideas called money fog. And so this is the one that I'm going to relate it to. This was presented by someone. Her name is Miss Braxton, and she looks at this idea of why is it that women tend to spend their money differently than the way men spend their money. And she relates it to this idea of math anxiety, this idea that there's this anxiety amongst women to deal with numbers. And so money fog, fog stands for fear, obligation, and guilt, where fear is stemmed from this idea of bag lady syndrome, this idea that if she spends money, she's going to lose all her money. Obligation, which comes from the fact that they see themselves as the primary caregivers, and they also see themselves as being mommy tracked. Mommy tracked being if you end up having a kid at some point in your career, you're less likely to be put up for promotions. And this idea of guilt. And I included this term because I find it very ironic that people use this term domestic engineers, which is this idea of them not being at home with their children. And so Braxton actually relates these ideas of mathematics anxiety with the way in which women spend their money. And so we see then that there's kind of a systemic problem going on here. There's a problem relating multiple things, and it all stems from this idea that there's more anxiety around numbers in women, which is why I decided to include an equation in my title, because I don't want anyone to be afraid of numbers. And I am going to be talking about this equation later on, but I think it's okay to have numbers in your title. I think it's okay to have an equation there. It shouldn't scare people, and that's one of the reasons why it's been included. And in case I lost some people, I decided to include a meme as well. Math is honestly not that bad. I really think that girls and really anyone who's interested in working with numbers and who's interested in computing things, they should go for it. In the end, honestly, if you make a lot of assumptions and a lot of simplifications, a lot of things will cancel out and it'll make a very difficult problem very easy to solve. Okay, so that was the first issue. The first issue is this idea that engineering is a man's field. We see that that is not the case. We do see this inequality, like I've said, and this inequality is real, and it creates this single narrative that, okay, well, men should be more so prone to engineering than women. The second single narrative that we see is this underrepresentation of women in engineering. And when I say it's a second single narrative, what I mean is constantly the story in engineering that you hear around women in engineering is that they're a minority group and they're an underrepresented group. So I was going to ask by a show of hands who knows about this, but I realize I can't see any of your hands. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk about it. So this happened a long time ago, well before a lot of you were born. And I think this is kind of the starting point of this whole idea of this underrepresentation of women in engineering. And it happened with the Ekal Polytechnic massacre. So this was actually for the longest time the deadliest mass shooting in Canada. And what happened was there was a male student who was studying mechanical engineering at Polytechnic, and he had 7 female students in his whole like mechanical engineering course. It was predominantly male students. And those 7 engineering female students, they had to do a group project, and the 7 girls decided to work together on their group project. And when they presented their group project, those 7 girls did very well. They presented a great project. The boy, on the other hand, the male student, did not do very well. And it prompted a lot of negative feelings within him. And a lot of these feelings were very anti feminist feelings, feelings that girls don't belong in this field, girls don't belong in engineering. And it prompted him to later kill 14 girls at that school, injuring another 12 girls at that school, and then killing himself. So, like I said, it used to be the deadliest mass shooting that happened in Canada. It was a very jarring moment, and it was really a moment that changed this narrative around women in engineering. And we began realizing that there is an underrepresentation of women in engineering. And now every year, McGill actually has a memorial for these women. So they actually call in 14 female students to lay roses on the memorial. So these are pictures of me last year at the memorial. It's actually the 30th anniversary of the memorial and the 30th anniversary of POW. So where does this come from? Where does this whole idea come from? And this idea, I think, is born out of events like this. When something like this happens, we begin to, realize change. So when something big happens, that's really when we start thinking about change. And that's really when events like this were labeled as anti-feminist events, and events that made us realize that there is an underrepresentation of women. So you're probably wondering, why is it that I'm talking about underrepresentation of women and I'm calling it a single narrative and I'm calling it a stereotype? And how does this relate to the groups that I'm part of, like promoting opportunities for women in engineering? And I'm going to get into that. So we're projecting a limiting narrative. The argument I'm making over here is that whenever you join groups like this, one of the main selling points of the groups are, this is actually pulled from our sponsorship package. One of the main selling points is that there is this underrepresentation. So female students at McGill University in undergraduate studies in engineering only make up 27.5% of the total student population. And that makes it feel like we're a minority. So what happens often is, or at least what happened with me, is I never realized I was a woman in engineering. Like I never realized that this was a position that I was in, or I had this responsibility, or I had this nature. I had something in me that made me feel like I needed to represent a whole group of people. And Ngozi, so I'm going to go back to Ngozi. Ngozi talks about this in her talk, where she says that she was an African writer. And when she was in Africa, she never identified as an African writer. She identified as a writer. And so she wrote. But when she came over here, she realized she was part of this minority group. And then she became an African writer as opposed to just a writer. And that's the problem that we're seeing now in engineering, is that we're not engineers, we're female engineers. So we begin to see this problem more and more. And often groups like POW, groups like Promoting Opportunities for Women in Engineering, will segregate based on gender. And they'll say, okay, well, we're really looking to empower women, or we're looking to, focus on the representation of women. And that's great. That's honestly, it's empowering, it's great, but we often project this narrative. We project this idea that we are a minority. And sometimes in projecting this idea, we instill in people's heads that you are a minority, and so your position is that of a minority group, when that's not always the case. It's not just POW who does this. So these are figures I pulled from Statistics Canada. And here you see that there's a stark difference. So engineering here is in light blue. There's a stark difference in the number of women pursuing engineering versus the number of men pursuing engineering. And when you put figures like this in front of people, they get it in their heads that they are a minority. So this idea of identifying as a woman in engineering, identifying as a woman in tech, or a woman in STEM, there are so many names for it. These are all buzzwords, but really, you're just someone in engineering. You're just someone in tech. You're just someone in STEM, and we shouldn't make this a gendered issue. There are so many groups out there. This is Society for Women in Engineering. I had no trouble coming up with this list. These were all names off the top of my head because they're so common. Society for Women in Engineering, Canadian Diversity in Engineering, Women in Science and Engineering, Promoting Opportunities for Women. These are all like local organizations that we've seen. So Society for Women in Engineering, they host a conference every year in San Diego. Canadian Diversity in Engineering, this is, I think, in Toronto. Women in Science and Engineering, this is at U of T, University of Toronto, and Promoting Opportunities for Women in Engineering, this is at McGill. And so all of them are projecting the same narrative, and that same narrative is women are underrepresented in STEM, and so it is our responsibility and our goal to increase the number of women in STEM and to empower women in STEM. And I'm saying that this is a limiting narrative, that we're more than just that. Each and every one of us are able and capable of doing engineering, and we're not just women in engineering, we are just people in engineering. We are in engineering. Canada has actually launched this 30 by 30 initiative, and what this is they want 30% of all people, 30% of all people who are engineers to be women by 2030. And so again, we're projecting this idea of significant underrepresentation. And I did relate this back to Ngozi. Like I said, she identifies as a writer, but she never identified as an African writer until she came here. Just as I identified as an engineer or as an engineering student, but I never identified as a female engineering student until groups like POW told me that, oh, there's this underrepresentation, and by the way, you're a female engineering student. So learning to realize that these are all social constructs. These are all things that are made by abstraction and by construction. Being an underrepresented group doesn't mean anything. You're still able to do all the things that you were able to do before. That being said, this is not to undermine the actual problem. And I think this picture really sums up the actual problem. And it's this idea that women face a very different set of obstacles than men. So often what you hear is a lot of companies will brag about how they hire at the rate at which they hire women at the rate at which women are graduating. So if 30% of people if 30% of people graduating from mechanical engineering are women, then companies will hire 30% female engineers, and the rest will be male. So they're matching whatever's being whatever is graduating. But that's not so much the case as you begin to move forward. And as you begin to move forward, we see a drop off in the number of women. And we often see as you move into higher positions that there are fewer and fewer women and fewer people of color, and often less and less diversity. So these can be examples that you see every day in companies that you encounter very often. And so acknowledging, of course, that there are a very different set of obstacles for women is important, and acknowledging these more negative stories is important, but I'm going to emphasize that acknowledging the positive stories is just as important. And this is, again, an argument that Ngozi makes. And so Ngozi talks a little bit in her TED Talk about this idea of when she was raised in Africa, a lot of people ask her, well, why don't you talk about the fact that Africa is an impoverished country, or that an impoverished continent. Africa is not a country, is an impoverished continent. And a lot of the countries in Africa have a lot of government corruption or political instability. Like, why don't you talk about that? And to that, she often replies, like, it is true. It was something that she saw a lot in her household. So she talked about how her mother would set the breakfast table every morning, and she saw that, sometimes there wouldn't be jam on the table. And then later on, there wouldn't be butter on the table, it'd be margarine. And then later on, there wouldn't even be margarine, and it would just be the bread. And so she talked a little bit about how this idea of, having impoverished nations is true. It's not a stereotype, but it is a single narrative. It's sometimes the only thing we think of when we think of Africa. And we don't want that to happen in this case. We don't want people to think, oh, when you're in engineering and you're a woman, there's this underrepresentation. We don't want that to be the only narrative. We want to tell more meaningful and more impactful stories as well, and tell those positive stories as well. And that's really what Ngozi does. And that's what a lot of other people do. And that's what we should strive to do. So how do we overcome this limiting narrative? So I've hinted at this a little bit. I've talked about telling more positive stories, but I'm really going to get into this. One of the things that we do at POW to overcome the single narrative is we want to tell the right stories. I think this is incredibly important, is telling the stories that matter and telling the stories that tell a more positive side of women in engineering. So we have a social media campaign. We have two right now. One is Powerful Engineer of the Month, Powerful Engineer of the Month. And here we showcase one fantastic engineering student at McGill who's really been doing something amazing. So this is Brenda. We also have Women of Color in STEM, where we showcase one amazing woman of color who has accomplished something amazing in a STEM related field. So learning to tell the right stories. Two, making the right connections and opening our network. I think this is incredibly important. So in university, you're going to see there's a lot of networking opportunities. So this was a mentoring and networking opportunity that we had with POW. And often people will feel limited and people feel like, oh, well, I have to wait until maybe I get a job or wait until I'm in university to begin expanding my network and talking to people. But you can start this right now. A lot of you have amazing professors and amazing teachers at your CEGEPs who you can talk to and you can ask them about their career paths, see how they got to the position that they're in right now. And it doesn't matter if that's not what you want to do, it's really a chance for you to open your mind and expand your own narrative and overcome this limiting narrative. So talk to the people around you who are in positions that you might want to be in one day and understand what brought them there and understand what motivated them to pursue these things. Find role models that resonate with our mindset. This is incredibly important, and this is what we do through these various social media campaigns. So this is a post from our Women of Color in STEM campaign, and it's this idea of setting out role models. We also have Woman Crush Wednesday, where we just choose our Woman Crush of the week, and so we've had amazing people like Julie Payette who have been featured and who talk about their journeys and who talk about what it's like being a woman in leadership, a woman in STEM, and a woman in tech, and understanding that there are those role models out there and there are people out there that can inspire and that can tell a more positive story as opposed to that limiting and reductive narrative of being just a woman in a STEM field. And find ways of supporting each other. I can't emphasize this enough. This is something that's been incredibly important for me as I've been at school and as I've been in university, is finding people who support you and making that supportive network. So this is me with POW. As you can see, this was Halloween and we carved out POW on pumpkins. We have an ice cream flavor called POW at one of McGill's. So McGill, inside the engineering complex, we have an ice cream shop. And so we have a flavor for our group at the ice cream shop. It's, I think, like black cherry or something. It doesn't taste very good, but it looks really nice. Anyways, this idea of having people that support you and learning to support each other. I think this is an incredibly important thing to do. A lot of people talk about how when you're a minority, you have this this unique fight and this unique struggle, but oftentimes there is a universal truth to when you're a minority in a certain group. And finding people who fall into that universal truth with you and having them support you through your mission and having them open up doors for you is an amazing way to get through your university career and hopefully later on in your actual careers. And we need new innovative supportive initiatives. So during COVID, a lot of these photos that I've shown, these were things that, that could have been done in person. And sometimes we feel like, well, we're not in person anymore. We can't necessarily connect with these people. I know it can be awkward sending an email to your professor when you haven't actually seen the professor in person, but learning to find these new initiatives and learning to communicate with people, even when you can't see them, is going to be incredibly important forward. We got to do an amazing panel with representatives from Bombardier with PALS not long ago, like just a couple of weeks ago. And so learning to connect with people and learning to make those connections even when we're millions of miles apart. and learning to give back to communities and learning to support women in STEM. So one of the cool initiatives that we got to do is give out scholarships to students who are pursuing STEM related or tech related projects in engineering. So there's a Montreal Regional Science and Technology Fair every year, and we got to sponsor awards to top female design projects. And now I'm going to come back to this equation. What this is this, so V here is a vector. And so if any of you have taken any physics courses or any calculus courses, you know that a vector has a direction and a magnitude, and it points a certain way. And when you subject a vector to these partial derivatives, what that means is you're forcing every vector to go in a different direction in space and in time. And when you do that, all the vectors are diverging and all the vectors repel each other and move in a different direction. And that's kind of the idea that I want to instill in everyone today is diverge from what you think the norm is and diverge from this idea that you think that, you know, we're underrepresented and we're a minority. And so we constantly need that extra help or that extra support. So diverge from that idea and really start to make your own narrative and really like I was saying before, overcome this limiting narrative by finding ways of supporting your peers, by finding the right role models that resonate with your mindset, by making the right connections and opening your network, and really by telling the right stories. And in doing so, hopefully we will all diverge. So I know I talk a lot about tech related fields, and I think especially now with COVID, it's sometimes difficult to think about what we could possibly do now. Like what a lot of opportunities are gone, and so a lot of people sometimes feel at a loss. They feel like, well, what can I do in tech from just my computer at home? Because that's all we really have. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things I've gotten to do in tech just from my computer at home to show that there is still opportunity and there is still room for growth, even in light of a global pandemic. And so this was the neural network I was talking about before, but this is a neural network that I got to program using AI on my computer at home. So I highly recommend if any of you get a chance to take a computer science course or just want to learn coding at home, I really think it's going to be the future as we move forward in in a global pandemic where we're all at home. But this is a neural network that connects all the different symptoms of a particular disease and shows how the symptoms are connected and how we can get diagnostic tools from this situation. So, for instance, we see that if two symptoms are connected, they're likely related. And if they're likely related, then perhaps the same medication or the same treatment can be used to relieve these symptoms. Another thing that you can work on from home is AutoCAD. So AutoCAD is computer aided design, and you can work on 3D printing and you can work on designing your own 3D models from your homes. So 3D printing was something that got really popular when COVID really started. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard this on the news as well, where people were making masks or making face shields using their 3D printers. And so learning how to use these 3D designing softwares is an incredibly valuable tool. Simulations as well. So doing experiments from your home. This is an incredibly interesting simulation, and it was the nanoparticles I was talking about before. And so nanoparticles, what happens is when you project photons onto a nanoparticle, or when you shine light on metallic nanoparticles, they actually get a little electric field around them. So if you've taken any physics courses, you know that this is called the photoelectric effect. At the nanoparticle scale, this is called the local surface plasmon resonance effect. And what's happening here is that when we shine photons onto metallic nanoparticles, we see that an electric field is being created beside the nanoparticles. And the electric field is strongest closest to the nanoparticles. So it's strongest over here in red, really close to the nanoparticles. And so what that means is we've designed an experiment that shows where in space the electric field is the strongest. And so we can put signals over here in the red zones in order to get the best reading of a certain sample. So let's say you want to read a sample of a very low concentration and you can't really get a good reading, put it in an area with a high electric field and you'll get a better reading. The whole idea over here being that we can simulate experiments and design experiments without actually being in the lab. And this is an interesting one as well. So this is one where you can look at sequence alignment. So as you know, our genome is made up of DNA, and often the DNA just seems like a string of letters, and we don't really know what that string of letters means. We know that, the central dogma around the string of letters is that you have DNA, and the DNA becomes RNA, and the RNA will become proteins. And we know that this happens for the actually a small minority of our DNA, and we don't really know what that means on a large scale. So sure, we have proteins and the proteins go off and do their tasks, but how are proteins related, or how can we make our own proteins for diagnostic applications? And a lot of that comes from looking at the similarity between proteins, seeing how two proteins are similar so that we can make a third protein that can execute a similar function in case there's a mutation in those first two proteins. So here we see a similarity sequence between two proteins. So on one end, we have plotted hemoglobin alpha. On the other end is hemoglobin beta. So hemoglobin is the protein we have in our red blood cells. It captures oxygen, and it's what delivers oxygen throughout our body. And both hemoglobin alpha and beta are structurally very similar. So this line over here basically shows similarity. So this is called a similarity matrix. And when you plot two things, anywhere along this line where anywhere along this line, the sequences are the same. And anywhere where there's a gap, it means that there have been mutations in the sequence. And so you can design experiments from home in order to see where we have mutations and where the DNA is possibly being faulty, or where something has happened to make it so that the hemoglobin is not functioning as it should be. So again, this can have amazing implications towards disease and diagnosis, especially in people who are not able to efficiently deliver oxygen using the hemoglobin in their blood. So all this being said, the concluding thoughts is a lot of this comes at the convergence of biology, of engineering, and computer science, and much more. And a lot of these, I think, are going to be consequential for decades. And so one of the pieces of advice somebody has instilled in me was, they said, when you look for what you want to do in the future, when you're graduating CEGEP and you want to think, okay, well, what am I going to do next in university? Aim to be consequential for decades. Aim to pick something that's not so much for the jobs of today, but for the jobs of tomorrow. And I think a lot of that is going to come at this convergence of biology, of engineering, and computer science, because while biology is great, you need to apply different tools to biology in order to analyze what you've had. So this applies a very qualitative approach. This applies a very quantitative approach, and together you're able to form links between things, and you're able to, like I said, aim to find something that's consequential for decades. So really, one of the things that I aim to do, and I urge all of you to do as well, is try as much as you can now, so you can make an informed decision later on. So if you have access to a computer, learn a coding language. If you have access to various software, a lot of these are free online. Learn how to 3D print, or learn how to do AutoCAD, and learn all these various tools and see what works and see what sticks, and use that as a guiding point for when you decide what you want to do moving forward. Because I feel like the intersection of a lot of these things is where a lot of meaningful work can be done. So that's going to be it from me. If you have any questions, I'll take them now, but I've also dropped my email and my LinkedIn if anyone wants to connect with me and ask me something later on.
Thank you very much, Houda. We have a few words of love here for you. First is from Sally. Thank you, Houda, for your words about owning your narrative and supporting each other. I have been working in tech for many years with an engineering degree. This year, I have been essential services following healthcare, food supply workers as serving the community, continuity and recovery of society as a whole. Well done on your projects and studies. I'd like to echo that. we also have from Reginald, he's asking about CRISPR and gene editing. Have
Mhm.
you done anything? It seems like a biotech field. Is bioengineering touching on that kind of stuff?
It is. It definitely is. CRISPR was a lot more popular a couple of years ago. The whole idea there being that you can do CRISPR from your garage. They used to sell little CRISPR kits, and you could take home that kit and work on gene editing on your own without even needing a lab. And so the whole idea behind gene editing being that you can edit the genome and you can remove the mutations. So here we talked about the mutations that could be potentially harmful. Sometimes mutations can be good and they can cause diversity, which is great as well. But you can remove mutations that could potentially lead to disease. The problem, however, with CRISPR being that it is ethically questionable to go in and alter the genome, and there have been a lot of implications of it being potentially harmful, and that we don't realize the repercussions of it now, but we will realize it in a couple of years. So there is a lot of potential there, and it was a lot more popular a couple of years ago. And I do think that there are people in the department who are working on this, but less so now than before. But if you're interested, I think there's like a lot out there, and I definitely think bioengineering is definitely working on gene editing, on tissue engineering, and on cell engineering.
Reginald had continued to say he thinks that more of analyzing graphs and more into programming languages for engineering is wonderful. I wanted to read from Jamil, who says, thank you for this enlightening presentation where you were expressing everything so clearly. Um, you say you don't know so much about what bioengineering, but we can clearly see your passion and interest in that topic. And what alone is a huge eye opener to follow what you love to do. It is very interesting how you can do experiments without even being in a lab. Thank you for your time and for this amazing presentation. From Raphael, she says, just so inspiring to listen to. It made me remember why I want to study STEM and to keep on working hard towards my goals. I really like this idea of limiting narratives and how it can narrow our vision of situations. I will definitely be more aware of this in my everyday life. I'm also really interested in the place of women in science. So listening to you was really interesting. I'm excited about pursuing my studies in STEM. Um, I had a question there too,
Yeah.
because by holding this, and I was wondering about your views on this, by holding a Women of Science celebration like this, where we invite all these wonderful talks and speakers like yourself, am I by organizing this, am I guilty of promoting the narrative? Um, and
I
that's
don't know if I'm,
this is
yeah.
the question. Like we look at ourselves to see, am I doing the right thing? Are we doing the right thing? I think everyone's self-reflecting in this world of understanding that open up some of our implicit biases even. Am I like that? Am I? So could you speak to that about having even like a movement that says, oops, you're a minority in this field?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a really hard question to answer. And I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. And also, I don't think I'm perfectly qualified to answer such a question. But I do want to highlight that you said a celebration of a woman. And I think that's kind of the key, right? If we aim to celebrate women, if we aim to tell the right stories and tell the stories that are empowering, that's different than going out and saying that, oh, you're a minority. And so we will provide opportunities for you. And so there's a difference in that narrative. And I definitely applaud initiatives like this, and I applaud celebrations like this because they do aim to tell the right story as opposed to telling a more reductive narrative. I don't know if that answered all of your questions. Was there anything else?
There were a few more statements of love for you. Thank you from Daniel. Daniel, thank you so much for teaching us so much about the underrepresentation of women in engineering, POW, and about the importance of the use of computers to achieve a better tomorrow. I definitely would like to learn more about the money fog and also watching Ngosi's TED Talk. So I think this, if you wouldn't mind today, if you have a moment here to put in the chat those links. We had Ngozi, and that I would love the link to the paper, although I wrote down the authors, I hopefully can find it.
All right.
And
Let me try to open this
yeah,
without the screen bugging out or something.
and if you don't mind, I'd like to tell you one more comment from
Mhm.
Sally.
For
This
sure. Yeah.
series, oh, she says this series helps students to, this series helps students of any gender think about possible futures. So it promotes possibilities. Thank you,
Yes,
Sally.
for sure.
Abood says, thank you so much for an amazing presentation. The stereotypes are really eye-opening and the tips are extremely relevant and useful.
Sorry to
I hope so.
sorry to
Oh,
interrupt.
sorry.
Mohammed too sent something saying, "Hey, thank you for this presentation." And his question is there a lot of women professors in the field of engineering?
That's an amazing question. And that's something that McGill has been trying to do better and better. So up until last year, there were 10 professors in the Department of Bioengineering. Out of the 10, one was a female teacher, and she actually went on maternity leave the semester that I was supposed to have her class. So I never got a female teacher. But now the department has taken an amazing initiative. They hired three new female professors, and I have one of them this year, and she is absolutely amazing. She's like a complete role model for me. I love talking about her credentials. So if you guys have 30 seconds,
Yeah.
she got her bachelor's in honors mechanical engineering from McGill University. Then she went on to do graduate studies at MIT. Then she went to go do her postdoc at postdoctoral studies. So after you get your PhD at Princeton, and then she published a paper in Science, which is one of the most prestigious academic journals out there, about the epidemiology of COVID-19. And she went on maternity leave after that and has since come back to become a tenure track professor at McGill University. So quite a rap sheet. There definitely are accomplished women in STEM out there. And I think, again, celebrating those right stories and telling those right stories makes all the difference. And so I have her class this year and I absolutely love it. It's a hard class. It's fluid mechanics and heat transfer. It's definitely a class that you won't have to think about until you're like your second or third year in engineering. But it becomes worth it when you have professors who are inspired and motivated to teach, and they love the work that they do. So I've linked the TED Talk and I've linked the paper in the chat.
And you also had Braxton there. She's an author who has, I
I
could try and
think,
find an article perhaps that she's written
yeah, I
related.
think I'll link her name. There's definitely stuff out there. I didn't link anything in specific here, but you can definitely look up money fog and find something.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much.
Of
Um,
course. So glad.
yeah, and yes, we would like to keep updated with how, do you have any ideas for next, when you're done your undergrad? This is your last year at McGill?
Oh, it's not. So I have one more year. That's a very good question. I don't know. I think I'm interested in learning more. I think that there's definitely a lot more that can be done and that could be done in both tech related and also in more, I guess, hands-on fields, the COVID depending, of course, and COVID compliant most of all. But I think I'd be interested in going to graduate school, learning more, expanding my horizons, and then who knows after that.
Okay. And if you don't mind linking your email and LinkedIn accounts, I think
Of course.
everyone would appreciate that from the chat as well.
Follow me.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this information.
Of course, yeah, I'm so glad. And honestly, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to send me a message. I'm like generally pretty available and I tend to respond to my emails fairly quickly. If not, send me a message on LinkedIn and I'll try my best to answer.